Before I recognize myself and Ranking Member Pallone, I'd like to address the unusual circumstances of this hearing. First, it is the custom of the committee and required under the House rules that a hearing will not commence earlier than 1 week after such hearing is announced. However, pursuant to Clause 2G3B of Rule 11 of the House rules, a hearing may begin sooner in one of two cases. Either, one, the chair and ranking minority member determine that there is good cause, or two, the committee so determines by a majority vote the good cause exception. In recent history, the committee has invoked the good cause exception to hold a hearing on short notice just a few times when holding hearings at the start of a new Congress. In these cases, Mr. Pallone and I had a discussion on the matter. Colleagues, I've remained and stayed true to our commitment, and the good cause exception has not become regular practice during my tenure as chair, and it will not become the practice for the duration. Following a classified briefing last week, Mr. Pallone and I have determined that there is a national security interest and good cause to hold this hearing on these bills with shorter notice so that we can maintain regular order before marking up this important legislation later today. Before we begin opening statements, do you have any initial comments, Mr. Pallone?
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Chair Rodgers, for your explanation and your commitment to continue with regular order as it pertains to the noticing of committee meetings. So thank you.
Okay. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning. Welcome today. Oh, that's not where we are. The Chinese Communist Party pose the greatest national security threat to the United States of our time. With applications like TikTok, these countries are able to target, surveil, and manipulate Americans. Protecting Americans' data and addressing the serious national security threat posed by the CCP have been my top priorities all Congress. This committee and others have been working diligently in a bipartisan manner to deliver solutions to address these critical issues. Today, we take action. 1 year ago this month, the CEO of TikTok testified before this committee to answer for the threat his company poses to America's national security. During the hearing, he was asked several times if ByteDance uses information it collects from TikTok users to spy on Americans. His response was, and I quote, "I wouldn't describe it as spying." TikTok has repeatedly been caught lying about its connection to ByteDance, as well as the level of access the CCP has to our data, which they are using to weaponize our freedoms against us. That ends now. TikTok's access to 170 million American users makes it a valuable propaganda tool for the CCP to exploit and use for nefarious purposes. Through this access, the app is able to collect nearly every data point imaginable, from people's location to what they search for on their devices, to who they're connecting with, and other forms of sensitive information. The app's trackers are embedded in sites across the web. So even if someone has never been on TikTok, their personal information is at risk of being collected and abused. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is currently under investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice for surveilling on American journalists. And that's just one example. It gets much worse. While TikTok may be the most well-known application subject to the CCP, it is certainly not the only one. Others, like Lemonade and CapCut, are also subject to the CCP's influence through ByteDance. That is why today we are discussing legislation that will prevent apps controlled by foreign adversaries from targeting, surveilling, and manipulating the American people. I commend members of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, in particular, Chairman Mike Gallagher and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamurthy, for their partnership on this legislation to address the immediate threat that ByteDance ownership of TikTok poses. And I look forward to quickly advancing this bill to the full House. This is a targeted approach to prohibit access to an application owned by a foreign adversary that poses a clear threat to U.S. national security. Additionally, we will be discussing legislation to prevent data brokers from sharing Americans' sensitive information with foreign adversaries and the companies they control. We know that data brokers sell our sensitive information to the highest bidder. And I am appreciative of Ranking Member Pallone bringing this legislation forward so that we may establish clear prohibitions on the sale of location and health information to our adversaries. This is an important step in our continued efforts to establish comprehensive data privacy in order to effectively crack down on abuses of our personal information. Companies controlled by a foreign adversary like the CCP will never embrace American values. Virtues of our society and culture, like freedom of speech, human rights, the rule of law, a free press, and others. Our adversaries choose to rule through fear and control. If given the choice, they will always choose the path for more control, more surveillance, and more manipulation. Apps like TikTok, Lemonade, and CapCut are spying by design. They have to. It is required by law in China. This foreign interference and manipulation is not welcome here. The threats posed by TikTok are real, which is why today we will be hearing from the national intelligence community about the threats and how this legislation will neutralize them. I look forward to our discussion today, and I yield to my colleague, Ranking Member Frank Pallone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, the committee will consider two bills, H.R. 7520 and H.R. 7521, that are intended to protect the public from foreign adversaries. Big tech has transformed the information superhighway into a super spreader of harmful content, invasive surveillance practices, and addictive and damaging design features. Foreign adversaries understand this and see access to Americans' data, communications networks, devices, and applications as the entry points to disrupt our daily lives and conduct espionage activities. And we have seen too often bad actors using communication tools to launch cyber attacks. They've pushed disinformation and propaganda campaigns in the United States in an attempt to undermine our democracy and gain worldwide influence and control. And this is all a detriment of our national security interests. And then there are the data brokers who collect and sell vast amounts of America's most sensitive personal information for profit. Right now, there are no restrictions on who they can sell this information to. It may be about members of our nation's military and our children, or it may be information about where we go, how we spend our money, and the websites we visit. And this information can be purchased by anyone, including foreign adversary governments. Most Americans are unaware that data brokers compile dossiers about their interests, beliefs, actions, and movements, and Americans are powerless to stop this invasion of their privacy. While the answer to this problem is comprehensive national data privacy protections, I firmly believe that we must do what we can now to safeguard Americans' personal data while we work to advance privacy legislation. So I'm pleased that today we will consider H.R. 7520, the Protecting Americans' Data from Foreign Adversaries Act, which Chair Rodgers and I introduced this week. It will address this national security vulnerability by preventing data brokers from selling sensitive personal information of Americans to our foreign adversaries. And we will also consider H.R. 7521, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act, introduced this week by Representatives Krishnamurthy and Gallagher. This bill sets forth a process to incentivize the divestiture of TikTok and other applications from the operation and control of foreign adversary governments like the People's Republic of China and Russia. Social media companies effectively are modern-day media companies, and we must treat them that way. This includes examining the foreign investments in these companies. Now, the Communications Act requires the FCC to undertake such an examination for our country's television and radio broadcast licenses. Congress placed this requirement on U.S. broadcasters to protect national security interests during wartime to prevent the airing of foreign propaganda on our country's broadcast stations. There is no reason social media companies should be exempt from this scrutiny. Given Russia, China, and others' actions on social media platforms during our recent elections, we know that while the technology has evolved, the threat is very much the same. The combination of TikTok's Beijing communist-based ownership and the fact that well over 170 million Americans use this application exacerbates its dangers to our country and our privacy. The laws in China allow the Chinese Communist Party to compel companies like TikTok to share data with them whether the companies want to or not. And this means that the CCP has the ability with TikTok to compromise device security, maliciously access Americans' data, promote pro-communist propaganda, and undermine American interests. So I look forward to hearing more today from our intelligence and national security community about how this bill can bolster their authorities to take action where it's needed to ensure that our modern-day media outlets are not subject to the influence of countries that see benefit in the weakening of our country. I have serious national security concerns about TikTok, and I am sympathetic to the intent of this legislation, but I want to hear from our witnesses before making a final decision. Now, finally, I must express my disappointment in how rushed this process has been. This committee has worked together on a bipartisan basis on numerous occasions to advance legislation that furthers our national security interests, so committee Democrats would have appreciated more notice and time to digest the legislation before it advances to a markup this afternoon. There are very complex constitutional concerns implicated by this bill, and I think we all would have benefited more from a more thorough process that results from regular order. Nevertheless, I appreciate that Chair Rodgers agreed to my request to hold this hearing so members can hear from experts and review the proposals before jumping to a vote later today. And so with that, Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. I now recognize myself to offer a motion pursuant to Clause 2G1 of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House of Representatives to recess this hearing and reconvene in executive session because disclosure of matters to be considered would endanger national security. I move that the committee do now recess and reconvene in executive session based on our determination that the disclosure of matters need to be considered during this hearing would, 1, endanger national security, and 2, compromise sensitive law enforcement information. The clerk will call the roll. So the motion is before us to recess pursuant to Clause 2G1 of Rule 11 of the House Rules. Clerk will call the roll.
Burgess.
Burgess votes aye.
Burgess votes aye. Latta.
Aye.
Latta votes aye. Guthrie. Aye. Guthrie votes aye. Griffith. Aye. Griffith votes aye. Bilirakis. Bilirakis votes aye. Bouchon. Aye. Bouchon votes aye. Hudson. Aye. Hudson votes aye. Wahlberg. Aye. Wahlberg votes aye. Carter. Aye. Carter votes aye. Duncan. Duncan votes aye. Palmer. Aye. Palmer votes aye. Dunn. Aye. Dunn votes aye. Curtis. Lesko. Aye. Lesko votes aye. Pence. Aye. Pence votes aye. Crenshaw. Joyce. Aye. Joyce votes aye. Armstrong. Yes. Armstrong votes aye. Weber. Aye. Weber votes aye. Allen. Allen votes aye. Balderson. Balderson votes aye. Fulcher. Fulcher votes aye. Pfluger. Pfluger votes aye. Harshbarger. Harshbarger votes aye. Miller Meeks. Miller Meeks votes aye. Kamek. Kamek votes aye. Obernolte. Obernolte votes aye. Pallone. Pallone votes aye. Eshoo. Eshoo votes aye. DeGette. DeGette votes aye. Schakowsky. Schakowsky votes aye. Matsui. Matsui votes aye. Castor. Castor votes aye. Sarbanes. Sarbanes votes aye. Tonko. Tonko votes aye. Clark. Cardenas. Ruiz. Ruiz votes aye. Peters. Peters votes aye. Dingle. Dingle votes aye. Veazey. Veazey votes aye. Custer. Custer votes aye. Kelly. Badagan. Blount Rochester. Soto. Soto votes aye. Craig. Schreier. Schreier votes aye. Trahan. Fletcher. Fletcher votes aye. Chair Rogers. Chair Rogers votes aye. Ms. Kelly is not recorded. Kelly votes aye.
Clerk will report the result.
Chair Rogers, on that vote, we have 43 ayes and 0 noes.
Motion is agreed to. We will now recess and will reconvene in a classified executive session in 2123 Rayburn. Ask the members to move to our secure location, check in their electronic devices. We will reconvene in approximately 15 minutes to continue the hearing and take the witness testimony there. The committee stands in recess.